Hey everybody, this is Mr. Moffin coming at you today. This is an APUSH video focusing in on topic 4.5, the market revolution. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at the development of how regionalism and industrialization are going to connect the different parts of America while they're still going to be having their own identity. So one of the areas that I wanted to focus in on is what is going to be having a major impact on the West. And once again, when we're talking about the West, we're talking about west of the Appalachian Mountains at the moment. So we're talking about places, close to home, like Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, but also you could even, get into places like Missouri or even areas, like Iowa, perhaps. Now, this part of America is going to start to become heavily reliant on farming. Commercial farming beyond subsistence farming. Now, this area is not going to be focusing in on cotton production because the climate is not very conducive to that. Plus, slavery is outlawed in these areas. But note, this area is going to have significant economic, it's going to have some economic significance nonetheless. Now, part of what's this area having significance is that the West is now going to start to become more and more connected to the East Coast through a lot of expanded infrastructure, mostly via canals and railroads, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But, when we do talk about the growing significance of the West in terms of its farming capacity, a lot of that has to do with not just more interconnectedness to the East Coast and not just the growing influx of folks coming in as farmers, but also the result of new technology with regards to farming. For example, the innovation focusing in on John Deere's steel plow. You're talking about the ability to much more easily dig up the earth, make it more suitable, make it easier to plant crops. And of course, the more crops that you can plant, the more crops that you can harvest. So John Deere is going to be having a major impact on that. On the other end, in terms of the impact of farming, is going to be the work of Cyrus McCormick and the mechanical reaper. Traditionally, you were kind of limited in terms of how much you could harvest based on, how hard could your hands work. But now the mechanical reaper is going to have a much more significant impact on a mechanized way to harvest crops. So if you're talking about, harvesting corn or wheat or things like that, now you can do this on a much larger scale. And of course, since you've been able to plant more crops as a result of the steel plow from John Deere, we are now taking farming to this whole new level, a much more modern level, which is going to lead to much larger production of crops. Now, that is going to be good to some extent for an individual farmer, but it can be problematic because, as we'll see as we go through the century, the easier it is to grow more crops on a national level, that means more crops being produced, the cheaper those crops will be, which will create some serious financial struggles for farmers as we go through the 19th century. But that being said, there's going to be other important innovations that are going to be sparking this market revolution, and a lot of it is based on transportation. For example, the expansion of what we would consider to be national roads. If you take a look here, let me go back here just a second. If you go back and take a look at some of the early innovations in this transportation revolution that we're looking at here, you've got, these turnpikes, you've got these long distance roads that are going to be connecting major cities. For example, this one here located here near Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Take a look at this stat down here. By 1832, nearly 2,400 miles of roads are now going to be connecting the major cities of America. And so with the better developed infrastructure with roads, the easier it is to transport goods, the stronger the economy will become. And here's a map, showcasing that right here. As you can take a look here, you can see that we're going to be seeing infrastructure actually using roads to go across the Appalachians. And if you take a look at here, this Cumberland Road, aka the National Road, this comes close to home. This is now U.S. Route 40, which goes through Columbus and north of Dayton. So you can see here, more folks are using these roadways to get to where they need to go via land. But even faster than, traditionally taking a wagon overland is going to be the use of waterways. Now, these waterways have been used for a long, long time. The problem, though, is that waterways, like rivers, only go one way until the development of the canals. We're going to be seeing the canal system really be developed in places like New York, but also areas near the Great Lakes as well. But New York is really going to be the biggest investor in the canal system, and the most famous of which will be the Erie Canal that you can see located here on this map. The beauty of a canal is that with this man-made waterway, you can go either direction. You're not, kind of beholden to the flow of the river to be able to go where you want to go. Now, it is going to take some serious investment by states like New York to develop these canals, but it will be pretty dramatic in terms of its positive effects. Think about it. Now you have the easy ability to take goods from the Great Lakes via the Erie Canal, transport them to the Hudson River, and now down to New York City and the Atlantic coast. Much faster than going all the way down, like let's say, for example, that you were in Buffalo. Much faster now to take the Erie Canal to New York than to go through the Great Lakes, try to move some of your product overland to the Ohio River, down the Ohio, down the Mississippi, around the Atlantic coast, around Florida, all the way back up north, and faster than by going by land. So the canal system is going to be pretty dramatic in terms of its importance across the north. Even here in Ohio, we had the Miami and Erie Canal, which connected Cincinnati through Hamilton and Middletown all the way up towards Lake Erie. So we were part of this canal boom for sure. But at the same time that we are developing more canals, we are also seeing the implementation of the steam engine being applied to boats. Robert Fulton's going to be getting credit for the development of the first steamboat here, the Claremont. And what this can do is, instead of changing the infrastructure, the actual waterway, creating new waterways with canals, it's now using steam technology to transcend the flow of a river if you wanted to go the opposite direction. So now, as we go through the first half of the 19th century, you're going to be seeing these steamboats being able to traverse, go north on the Mississippi River and go east on the Ohio River to be able to bring goods to where folks need to go and do it in a much more efficient and therefore cheaper way. So when we kind of look at the results of these innovations in transportation technology, you can see that the cost of moving things is going to go down significantly as we go through the first half of the 19th century. And the cheaper it is to ship goods, and as we'll talk later on here about the impact of manufacturing, therefore making it cheaper to produce goods, then that's going to mean it's going to be cheaper to buy goods. And the cheaper it is for Americans to buy goods is going to then allow them to have a lot more luxuries, quote-unquote luxuries, of life of the 19th century. Things that, 3 generations before would have been impossible to actually own. Now, in addition to, these other examples of transportation that we talked about, canals and steamboats and things like that, there's going to be one innovation that is going to dominate them all, and that is the railroad. The Iron Horse, as it was initially called, is going to dramatically reshape how we transport not just goods, but people. And it's going to have a dramatic effect on where people are going to be living as a result of this new technology. And as you can see here, the development of railroad track is going to be nothing short of, exponential. If you take a look here in 1830, only about a dozen miles of railroad track existed. But, 10 years before the Civil War starts approximately, we're going to have 9,000 miles of railroad track in this country. take a look at this map of the United States in the 1850s showing railroad lines at the time. Hopefully you can notice that there's a big difference between the amount of railroad track that is developed here in the northern half of the United States versus the southern half. A lot of it deals with the fact that the North, as we're going through this antebellum period, before the Civil War, is becoming more and more urbanized. It's becoming more urbanized in part because it is becoming more and more focused on industrialization and manufacturing of goods as opposed to farming. And so with more people, more cities, you're going to see more railroad track be developed. Whereas in the South, as we'll talk later, the South is still going to try to hold on very much so to its agrarian roots. It's becoming more and more tied to cotton production, and so there's going to be fewer cities, and so there's going to be less railroad track that is going to be developed. Now, this is not going to be just impactful in terms of just showing the difference between the ways of life in the North and the South. This will have a major impact on the outcome of the Civil War, when the North is going to be able to quickly move goods towards the front, whereas in the South, not so much. Lastly, I did want to talk about another major innovation, and that is going to be focusing in on communication, and that will be Samuel Morse's telegraph. The telegraph is going to revolutionize communication. Prior to the telegraph, the way that you communicated long distances, you wrote letters, and you relied on usually horseback, postal carriers to take these letters, where they needed to go. And it was very common for a letter to take weeks to get to where you wanted it to go, and then somebody else will write a letter, and then that'll get transported back to you. So, the idea of long distance communication was extremely slow, which then limited significantly the amount of long distance communication. But Morse is going to change all that, or at least begin to change all that. What the telegraph machine will do is use electricity to send pulses along wires that are going to be connected across the country, and these pulses that will be sent in such a way that a trained reader of the pulses will be able to translate those pulses into English and therefore be able to, transcribe a letter. Those pulses will be in a language that we're eventually going to call Morse code. Now, once again, you needed a trained, telegraph operator to be able to utilize Morse code typically. But think about this. What used to take, maybe, a couple of weeks to transport a letter traditionally, now you could take your handwritten letter, take it to the local telegraph office. Now, granted, these telegraph offices were usually in larger cities, but still, you took it to the telegraph office. The telegraph operator will then transcribe that letter into Morse code, send those pulses along the wire to another telegraph office, and it could be a city hundreds of miles away, and then that telegraph operator will collect those pulses and then transcribe those pulses into your letter, what you had originally written, and then notify and then send that along through the postal service to your person that you're trying to communicate with. So you are taking what had been weeks to communicate, and now you're turning it into hours, which is pretty remarkable stuff. It really is. So with this advancement in technology in terms of communication, the country and the world becomes a lot smaller. It's going to reduce a lot of isolation in America for sure. Okay? Well, we'll leave it there for today. Next time we will be taking a look at more of the other aspects of the market revolution, focusing in on industrialization. We'll see you then. Bye.